Boxing truth here. Kell Brook would murder Keith Thurman if there was to fight, especially later in the year, as Kell Brook is demanding that fight after he gets through with Jesse Vargas to unify the titles. He's calling up for a Keith Thurman bout for the end of the year, and it's definitely a fight that's definitely doable, makeable, as Kell Brook is looking to fight 2 more times. As he's in final negotiations for a Jesse Vargas fight that's been a little complicated because Kell Brook is frustrated that a B-side opponent is going to make more money than him simply to come over to the UK to fight him. But that's what it's been taking in order for Kell Brook to get a significant fight in his career. Eddie Hearn has had to bend over. And Vargas wasn't going to come over for chump change. He needed to get life-changing money, a career-high payday of $1.7 million for him to even consider about to go on the road and be the road warrior and take on what many consider as the best welterweight in the world, now that Manny Pacquiao and Mayweather are still officially retired in Kell Brook. So that fight, I think, is gonna go down. It should go down. It's just they're too deep in negotiations for not to go down. There's been too much talk. Don't see why the reason doesn't come off. The fight doesn't come off between Kell Brook and Jesse Vargas. Now, if Kell Brook beats Jesse Vargas, he wants the Thurman fight. Doesn't see a need for a rematch between Porter and Thurman. Besides, Thurman might have mandatory obligations. A fight that is not very desirable for him, coming off a big win over Sean Porter. He might have to fight the guy that beat Shane Mosley, who holds the interim strap for the WBA. As WBA has gone through a pretty bad process of trying to get rid of all these bogus belts in their weight categories, as have been able to get the job done. Still a bunch of bogus champions for the WBA. So they haven't been doing a good job of that. So they might make a mandatory defense. They might enforce a mandatory defense upon Keith Thurman and unify the titles with the guy that just beat Shane Mosley. In a fight that Thurman is not interested in, neither is Team Thurman interested in. It's definitely not the fight to come off a big win over Porter. But if it keeps him active, fine. It's ideal for Keith Thurman to get another fight in this year. He's been off for a year. Finally got a fight in against Sean Porter. Got the win. The rematch can be later for down the line. Like he said, the fight can still be made, the rematch with Porter, after both guys have moved on with their careers, get a few fights. Maybe Porter gets a couple of wins, and then maybe they can fight later on. But for Keith Thurman, in order to bypass this undesirable mandatory bout, he could offer unification, but most likely will have to be against Kell Brook, as Danny Garcia has gone quiet. He still doesn't have a fight scheduled. Rumblings that he's still perhaps waiting for Mayweather, maybe still waiting to see what Amir Khan's gonna do, if he's gonna exercise his right in order to get his mandatory shot for Danny Garcia, since Khan is still the number 1 contender for the WBC. So Garcia is on hold, still waiting to see what's the next move for him. Keith Thurman wants Danny Garcia, and that's a fight that's a much more winnable for Keith Thurman, since Garcia is still accumulating himself in the welterweight division. But Kell Brook is the fight Keith Thurman should stay away from, as he just doesn't have the technique or the skill set to beat a Kell Brook, as Kell Brook, right now in my eyes, is the best welterweight in the world, and you can further make a statement, an exclamation point on it, by having a good performance, an impressive win over a Jesse Vargas, and by unifying the titles. But I was watching some footage of Kell Brook. He just does everything right. He's got good technique. He has a jab that can set up other power punches. He's got a very good straight right hand. He's just a lot sharper, much better technique, much better boxer. Puts his punches together in combinations. Doesn't just throw one punch or just two punches like Keith Thurman does. Keith Thurman just throws a lot of big looping shots. Maybe one or two punches at a time. He's a good counter puncher, but he has a terrible jab, and that's the punch that's going to eat up Keith Thurman if he was to fight Kell Brook. But the fight's there for him if he wants it, if Team Heyman wants it, if Heyman wants to pull the trigger on that fight. It could be a lucrative payday for later in the year if Thurman was to go over to the UK to fight Kell Brook. The fight in the United States, it's not a pay-per-view fight in the United States. It's not the most lucrative fight. But it could be worthwhile for Keith to go over to the UK because of the market over there and how a fight over there could produce his biggest payday. But it's a dangerous fight. A fight I don't think Keith Thurman could win right now. I see Keith Thurman getting straight up trashed by Kell Brook. It'll be a good fight. It'll be an interesting fight. But I just don't think that Keith just has a skill set, doesn't have the boxing ability, doesn't have the arsenal of punches compared to a Kell Brook. As Kell Brook, I see just pretty much just picking apart Keith Thurman up the middle with straight jabs and straight rights, showing his superior technique and skill set in a fight. I believe that's not very winnable for Keith Thurman. So, Thurman and his team have a choice to make. They have a decision to make. Do they want to go unify the titles right now, since that fight is not as big as it can be? Is he willing to go to the UK to fight Kell Brook for unification, potential unification later in the year? Or is he content with just taking on his mandatory defense against an opponent who is coming off beating a name guy in Shane Mosley, but not the most desirable opponent, not the most well-known guy? Not the most desirable fight out there. And we'll see what Heyman does with Thurman next, as it's definitely not going to be a Porter rematch. Hopefully Heyman doesn't fuck this up for Thurman. Keep the momentum going. Keep him busy. Hopefully he gets another fight in before the end of the year. It'll be interesting to see if Thurman can get a unification later in the year. But, Heyman, he likes to prolong shit. He likes, sometimes he fucks up and keeps guys on the shelf coming off big wins. So hopefully Thurman would at least get another fight in. If he fights his mandatory obligation, fine. As long as he's active, as long as he gets another fight in this year. But Kell Brook wants to fight later this year, as he's pretty much planning on moving up in weight by 2017, as it's getting more and more difficult for him to make the weight. I mean, just look at him. The guy's big. He's a big welterweight. Don't see him fighting at welterweight for much longer, so he's trying to get the most significant fights possible, unify the most titles he can, and then make the eventual move up to 154. But who would you pick in the Kell Brook Keith Thurman fight if there was a fight later in the year? I see Kell Brook possibly stopping Keith Thurman in a potential bout, as I think his technique is too sharp. He has better fundamentals, better boxing ability. He's also a good puncher, and he's been destroying opponents. Not the best welterweights out there. Mandatories, domestic fights, but right now I see it. Kell Brook being the best welterweight in the world. He just has to go out there and prove it. The first step is against Jesse Vargas. Hopefully that fight goes down. It gets signed, sealed, and delivered. Kell Brook can't afford to be fighting no-name mandatories. Can't afford to be fighting those type of opponents. He needs a big, significant fight. Hopefully that fight goes down. We'll see what happens later in the year. What happens with Danny Garcia? What's his next move? Will Thurman take unification over a mandatory? And do you think Keith Thurman should take that fight later in the year? As I don't think he could beat Kell Brook, but y'all let me know what y'all think. This is Boxing Truth. I'm out.